Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I was just going to ask for the recording to get started. So I'd love to call the Climate Committee meeting to order. We have a few logistical items that we need to address before we take the roll. I'm just going to read a little disclaimer here. This meeting is being live streamed on Zoom and recorded. So members, for online attendees to hear, please make sure you unmute your microphone when speaking and identify yourself when making or seconding a motion so that the secretary can capture who is making the motions. For those of us that are attending in person, please complete the sign-in sheet. I did not do that. I need to do that. Located in the hallway before you leave. If you wish to make public comment, please fill out the public comment card and return it to a staff member. For those of you that are participating via Zoom, please keep your microphones or your telephones muted unless you're called upon to speak. This helps to eliminate excessive background noise. You can use the mute button on the Zoom screen, or for those on the phone, you can press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. When appropriate on the agenda, we will request comments from those online, and you can indicate your desire to speak via the chat box. Staff is monitoring Zoom. Thank you, staff. And we will recognize you when it is your time to speak. So I will hand it over to CMAP staff to please call the roll.
Hi, everybody. So, Aaron Dernbaugh.
Here.
Deborah Stone is not here. Edith Macra.
Here.
Elena Grossman, not here. Elizabeth Cox, not here. Emily, oh man, what's your last name? Rice.
Here.
Thank you. Ethan Kimbrell.
Here.
Jack Chan.
Here.
Mary Nickel. Here. Matthew Santagata. Naomi Davis, I don't think is here. Paul May.
Here.
Reed Massour.
Here.
Ryan Wilson.
Here.
Samira Hennison. Not yet. I think she's coming. Stefan Schaefer.
Here.
Thomas Maillard is not available, and Vanessa Ruiz we'll get to in a moment.
Thanks very much, Nora. I think we have quorum, so we can move forward with today's business. Thanks for everyone for being here in person. I know it can be a challenge with such a busy summer and probably with some other obligations like nice warm Lake Michigan calling our attention. So we did receive a request from Vanessa Ruiz to participate remotely in the meeting. She made the request in compliance with the Illinois Open Meetings Act, but this does require a majority vote of those of us that are here in person by voice vote. So I would need a motion and a second for Vanessa to participate via Zoom.
So moved.
Thanks, Edith Macra moved.
Second.
And Mary Nickel seconded. Thank you very much.
So I believe we're still having some issues with the Zoom, but we will let Vanessa in as appropriate when you guys.
Great. Can we do a voice vote for that? All those in favor? Thank you. All right. I think that's what we needed to do there. We are now moving into item 2, agenda changes and announcements. Were there any changes to the announcement than what was sent out?
No, there are not.
Terrific. We will move on to announcements, and I will hand it over to Bill Barnes, Deputy of Regional Policy and Implementation, who's with us and will deliver the updates on behalf of CMAP.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the OPO and happy summer. It's been a couple months since we last met, so I have a couple of updates that are going to nicely set the stage for some of the presentations we're going to have later this afternoon. So first off, from a legislative standpoint, there's going to be a ledge update, but I'm happy to announce that the Regional Planning Act Modernization Bill passed both chambers and awaits signature from the governor. If it becomes law, it's going to afford some changes to CMAP's enabling statute that is going to allow us to make timely decisions at the board level and create some efficiencies with them. Some of those, well, actually, I shouldn't say, none of the changes in that legislation affect or influence the bylaw changes that we're going to be considering today. But do know that those CMAP, the Climate Committee bylaws are mirroring changes that have been made to the board bylaws in past board meetings. Speaking of the board is on its summer hiatus, so they won't be meeting again until September. But in our the most recent board meeting, they reviewed the executive director's performance review and approved a 5-year contract renewal for Aaron Alleman, our executive director. They also received and filed the fiscal year 23 financial audit. I'm also excited to say that CMAP has awarded technical assistance grants to 30 projects this year. Now, if you're not familiar with the technical assistance program, those are grants that CMAP issues for planning and implementation work. And they can range from anything from ADA evaluations to bike ped projects to grant readiness work to support under-resourced communities, and more specific to this committee, watershed planning work to take a look at water quality and ensure improvements are made. This year's joint call for projects, along with the Regional Transportation Authority, received a combined 122 applications from 96 different applicants across the region. As I indicated, we awarded 30 projects, 11 of which are with cohort 3 and 4 communities. So those are communities that are in greater need of support from the grant projects that they will be funding. Also, important for this committee to know, and if you don't know already, climate dollars are coming to Illinois. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency received over $430 million in GHG reduction and mitigation funding through the US EPA's Carbon Pollution Reduction Grant Program. This is the very program that's funding the climate action planning work that's going on in this region that you'll hear a little bit about later. And it's notable that the award the state of Illinois received was the 3rd largest of 25 that were awarded out of a total pot of $4.3 billion. So great news for Illinois, great news for the region, because some of the highlights of the work that the state plans to do with this money includes the acceleration and expansion of existing programs to retrofit residential and commercial buildings and to expand that into more communities than they've already targeted. It's also going to support new programs such as clean industry concierge work to support the decarbonization of up to 10 industrial facilities. So exciting there. You'll hear about the industrial sector and the emissions later. And also the IPA sought funding to create and expand equitable climate workforce training opportunities, building on the momentum the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act created, and also mirroring some of the obligations that we as a region have under our climate action planning obligations. So this grant funding, we've talked about it at past committees. As I indicated, it's supporting our climate action work. And CMAP would like to recognize the hard work of the various municipalities and regional implementers that we worked with and coordinated between to identify implementation proposals for consideration by the US EPA. Through our work on the climate action planning work, which we'll hear about again later, we're going to continue to coordinate with those entities to make sure that all the voices are heard and that the solutions identified impact all the necessary sectors. CMAP, if you haven't noticed, just launched a new website. So check us out on the web. It's revamped and redesigned using, and I quote, strong research and data to drive design and prioritize the user experience. As the region's planning agency and data resource, this website is a go-to resource for communities and residents around the region. In fact, over 180,000 people used it annually last year. The site has a new climate and natural resources page, so I urge you to take a look at those. Other new features include a robust and enhanced events calendar to encourage engagement with our public bodies, and embedded tools like the Community Data Snapshots visualization tool and the Job Quality and Access tool. Again, take a look at those. But, speaking a little deeper about the Community Data Snapshots, CMAP just issued some new ones this year. And these help local leaders and the public at large track progress and make informed decisions within their community. So these snapshots contain a lot of data, and they're specific to various levels of jurisdiction. So we have one for each of the 284 municipalities in the region, the 77 Chicago communities, and the 7 counties themselves. And these snapshots summarize demographics, housing, employment information, transportation habits, and other key details with some new data points around updated water source demand and price data, data on people with disabilities, and fresh land use and employment characteristics data. So we hope you find that informative and helpful in the work that you're doing, and please share it with your constituents. CMAP just completed our 16th annual Future Leaders in Planning, or FLIP, summer program for high school students in Northeastern Illinois. This free leadership development program helps students explore the field of urban planning and learn about the issues that shape our region and the community. We had 23 students from around the region, and they had lessons on the climate action plan. They got to go to the Lincoln Park Zoo, and also had a field trip to MWRD. So we're wrapping up my comments, I promise. But for those of you who are longstanding committee members, you will have heard some new names in the roll call and maybe see some new faces around the table. So I'm pleased to welcome 5 new members to our committee. This is part of CMAP's goal to engage or continue to expand the aperture through which we see and receive feedback from a wide and diverse range of viewpoints. So we have, as I indicated, 5 new members that were appointed before this meeting. We hope to have more members appointed at future formal meetings, but I would like to recognize, and not everyone's here in person, so bear with me. We had Stefan Schaefer. Stefan, welcome. Former CMAP board member and current Senior Director of Strategy Planning and Operations at NRDC, so welcome. We have Scott Kuykendall. He is a water resources specialist with the McHenry County Planning and Development entity. Ryan Wilson. Ryan, you walked right past me today, so I'm sorry I didn't say hi to you. Director at our sister planning agency, MPC. Emily Reiswig, VP of Conservation and Policy at Open Lands, longtime member, and glad to have Open Lands back. And then Robin Grooms, who isn't here. Is she? Oh, Robin, I'm sorry. You weren't, yeah. Yeah. So I've seen you on Zoom many times in the implementation field. So welcome. Sustainability Programs Manager, Lake County Administrator's Office. So welcome. So finally, I have to add that it's come to my attention that longtime committee member Deb Stone has tendered her resignation from Cook County. So that's effective, I believe, the end of August. So she will be departing the board. Deb, as you know, has served for many, many, many years as the director of the county's Department of Environmental and Sustainability, and also their chief sustainability officer. So I hope you'll join me in wishing her well in her next personal and professional endeavors. And then finally, we couldn't be here today. We wouldn't have this agenda. I wouldn't have these notes to read from and bore you with without all the help from our CMAP staff. So countless folks have helped us to curate this material and wrangle the cats that are sitting around the table to ensure that we have quorum. So special shout out to them with a highlights for Jared Patton and Michael Collins. So with that, take it away here. Thank you. And I'll take any questions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was just going to open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Bill for any of his highlights or? If not, I'll just mention for those on Zoom or in the room, I believe we do have Vanessa Ruiz with us on Zoom. So welcome, Vanessa, and Samira Hanessian has joined us. Thanks for being here. So as Bill mentioned, we have some new members. We're going to give them a moment to go around and just introduce themselves very quickly. So I will just ask that you introduce yourself, your organization, and if there's something specific you're looking forward to bringing to the Climate Committee, we welcome that as well. So I'll start, we'll just go around the table. I'll start with Stefan.
Yeah, Stefan Schaefer, he, him pronouns. I, as Bill mentioned, am the Senior Director for Strategy, Planning, and Operations at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I've been there for about 5 years and worked at City Hall just before that in the mayor's office there. So just excited to bring kind of a lens of governance, operations, and strategic planning to the work, and looking forward to meeting and working with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. And I will then go around the table to Ryan.
Sure. Ryan Wilson, Director at Metropolitan Planning Council. I've been there also for about 5 years. My work is mostly focused on water supply, stormwater, but over the last couple of years, we've been integrating more climate data. And over the next couple of years, we'll be looking at downscaling climate data to kind of be applied to nature-based infrastructure. So really excited to be joining you all.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And Robin, welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Robin Grooms. I'm the Sustainability Programs Manager for Lake County Government, and I see myself as being one of the public implementers for a lot of policy decisions that come down from CMAP.
And last but not least, hi, Emily.
Good afternoon, everyone. Emily Reiswig, Vice President of Conservation and Policy at Open Lands. We are a regional land trust, and so land and all that it includes is our business, and we're really excited to bring that lens to this work.
Thanks so much. And as was mentioned, we also have a new member in Scott Kuykendall with McHenry County Planning and Development, who will be joining us at future meetings. So moving on to item 3, which is our past meeting minutes. A copy of the minutes was included in your meeting packet. Hopefully you all had a chance to look through that. Were there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes for those that had a chance to review them and were present at the last meeting? Hearing none, I guess I would just ask for a motion and a second to approve last meeting's minutes.
Move to approve the
Thanks,
minutes.
Edith.
Second.
And a second from Emily. Thank you very much. All those in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you very much. So moving on to the important parts of the meeting, for now that Bill's update wasn't critical. We're going to go into new business. Important, but maybe also a little administrative, is our bylaws update. So there was an update that was sent around into change to our committee bylaws in the meeting packet, as well as a memo that sort of outlined the major changes. So I'm going to hand it over to Bill to maybe give us a little bit more introduction to this before we take any action.
Sure, appreciate that. Thanks. So as I indicated, we at CMAP revised or are proposing revisions to the Climate Committee bylaws to largely reflect changes that have been made over time to the board bylaws. And basically, the amendments that we're proposing achieve 2 goals. First is efficiency and flexibility, and the second is transparency. So I'll walk you through both of those. From a flexibility standpoint, longstanding board members will know that we've struggled at times to meet the physical quorum requirements of formal meetings under the Open Meetings Act. So the Open Meetings Act says that a formal meeting of a public body, you have to have quorum physically present at the location of that meeting. If you don't have it, then you can't have that meeting. And this has tripped us up a couple of times over the past year that has sort of prevented us from engaging with you and the public at large on, some of the important initiatives that we're working on here, sort of robbing us of the ability to engage with you and get your viewpoints to help shape the work that we're doing. So one, well, we've done two major amendments to achieve the flexibilities that will allow us to meet more regularly on a wider range of topics. First of all, we are proposing changing members from actual individuals to organizations, because right now it's tied to Stefan. And if Stefan can't show up, he can't designate a representative or a delegate in his stead. And we're robbed of that ability. So by tying it to an organization, it gives us a wider breadth and depth of potential participants in the meeting to allow us to achieve physical quorum. The second is the creation of 2 types of meetings. Currently, the only meetings that are permissible under the committee bylaws are formal meetings. Those meetings that are subject to the Open Meetings Act and again have the physical quorum requirement. What we are proposing is to allow less formal workshop meetings. These are allowed in the CMAP board bylaws, and we figured that this would be a good opportunity for us to create the flexibility to be able to pivot quickly as things arise, urgent or emergent things arise for consideration by subject matter experts like yourself. So what we are proposing in the board in the bylaws are the creation of sort of two types of meetings. One, the formal meetings like this, where we all show up in the old post office or wherever the meeting is called, and we have physical quorum. And formal action is taken where votes are taken and actual decisions are made. And then we're also proposing to allow the less formal ad hoc workshop meetings, which are open to this committee, but they are not formal meetings, so they can be entirely remote. They can be hybrid. Everyone can attend from the comfort of their own couch. But they're also open to folks, a wider audience than just this committee. So we could invite anyone that we would like to attend and listen to, that subject matter. So that gets to the transparency component. And one of the things that we wanted to continue was the vein of ensuring that we had public oversight on all the work that we're doing at this committee. So the proposed amendments ensure that notices for meetings, be they formal or informal, will be done in a public fashion, just like we're doing now. Agendas would be identified and published, and that the public would be invited to attend and participate, much like they are in a formal meeting. So, by and large, those are the two buckets into which the proposed changes fall. Again, to create the efficiencies to allow us to have organizations as opposed to individuals as members, have formal and informal workshop meetings, and then also to reinforce a commitment to transparency and public participation. But I will take any questions that you have.
Does anyone have any questions on the proposed changes to the bylaws? I think that was, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry. What I was saying is I wasn't able to access the specific amendments with the link in the agenda, but I was wondering whether the workshops had a location required of them. Are they required to happen at CMAP? Is that different from
No.
the regular committee meetings?
Nope, there's no requirement, and they can be hybrid. So some folks can be present at the OPO, but attendees can be remote as their schedules permit.
Thank you.
With the shift to kind of organization representation, how does that impact, if at all, existing members' terms? Like, does it just roll straight into the organizational representation, or does that reset?
Great question, and I've thought about that. So what we'll be doing is, if the amendments pass, I will be issuing, well, actually, I won't be issuing it. Our executive director will be issuing appointment letters to your respective organizations, and the designations can be made appropriately. Hopefully, it's each and every one of you.
No other questions? I think we're ready to consider adopting the changes to the bylaws as they were presented by CMAP. So just double checking here. Are there any last questions? If not, I'll take a motion to accept the proposed changes to the bylaws as were sent around in the meeting packet. Paul May just moved.
Second.
Oh, we'll have Jack Chan second that one. Thanks, Edith. All right, all those in favor to adopt the changes to the bylaws?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the meeting schedule. With this change to the bylaws, we'll be leaving behind the schedule that we had adopted, because those were all sort of formal meetings with the in-person quorum requirements, to a workshop and formal meeting schedule, which was also sent around as a memo in the packet. It has the next two meetings being scheduled as workshops, October 24th and February 27th. And then the next sort of formal action meeting for us being May 22nd with a in-person quorum requirement. Any questions on that meeting schedule as it's proposed? If none, then I will again welcome a motion and a second.
So moved.
Stefan Schaefer moved to adopt those dates, and Ryan Wilson is second. All those in favor? Aye, thank you. All right, for the next item, Ryan Gugas, legislative specialist, will provide an update on relevant bills that have been filed with the General Assembly. So I will hand it over to Ryan.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing this afternoon? I think there are a few Ryans in the room, so if I say so myself, it's a great name. No. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll get into our legislative update. So, oh yeah, can this be? Perfect. That works. Thank you. Cool. So the Illinois General Assembly adjourned on May 29th for the spring 2024 legislative session, passing the FY25 budget and the Budget Implementation Act, or the BIMP, and several other measures that impacts CMAP's work. I know Bill kind of mentioned this earlier, but we're very excited about the RPA modernization bill passing on both House and Senate with unanimous support, and it's currently with the governor, and we do anticipate him signing that into law. You know, anything can happen, but we do, and we feel pretty good about where we are with that. The next piece of legislation was the RPA appropriation bill. That bill would appropriate $5 million to CMAP to help fulfill our Regional Planning Act obligations that are established in CMAP's enabling statute. We weren't successful in incorporating this into the FY25 budget, but CMAP staff, we're going to continue working with members of the General Assembly and the governor's office to advance this appropriation and get funding to support CMAP's work. One thing that we did want to highlight as far as the FY25 budget is that the FY25 budget proposal sought to increase 150 million transfer from the road fund to the public transportation fund by $175 million, totaling $325 million. The RTA Act requires the road fund to provide 150 million to the public transportation fund each year, plus funds for RTA's debt service. The remaining of the PTF's annual funding has historically come from the General Revenue Fund. The FY25 BIMP, it instead increases the transfer from the road fund to the public transportation fund by only 75 million, totaling 225 million. It also calls for a 50 million transfer from the leaking underground storage tank fund, or LUS fund, to be transferred to the public transportation fund. The LUS fund is funded through a fraction of the motor fuel tax, but is separate from the road fund. Both the 75 million and the 50 million transfers included in the FY25 BIMP are one-time transfers to occur only in FY25. However, this sets a precedent for similar transfers in the future. And really the main takeaway with this is that these transfers, they don't provide new revenues for transportation, but they rather shift the funding burden from the public transportation fund away from the General Revenue Fund. This does not meet the transportation system's operating and capital needs at a time when, one, additional funds are needed, and two, the long-term sustainability of existing revenue sources like the motor fuel tax continue to be at risk. The next item that I want to talk about is the Climate and Equitable Transportation Act. I'm sure you all may be familiar with this omnibus package of legislation, but it was introduced at the end of April this past session. And it's again, an omnibus package of bills that includes several different transit and climate provisions that would impact the region. The first component of the bill is the Metropolitan Mobility Act. I know this has been getting a lot of media coverage and a lot of conversation about this, but it offers a range of governance reforms, including consolidating the RTA and the service boards into one entity to manage transit in the region. We believe it is important to maintain the three-leg stool approach that we took in the PAR report, as the focus now shifts to legislative action. We're also seeing the General Assembly is, they're in the process of having subject matter hearings on the transit legislation. Two of the six have already been completed. The first two focused on how transit supports the economy, and then how transit must be accessible and equitable. And I know CMAP staff, we are, keeping ourselves engaged on that process and just following closely to see what's really going to happen with the subject matter hearings and ultimately with the legislation. So something, we know something has to get done by next session. So more to come on that. The next part of the Climate and Equitable Transportation Act is the Transportation Choices Act, or the GHG legislation. This would set a statewide GHG target for the transportation sector and detail several steps that MPOs and IDOT would need to take to ensure that the regional transportation plan and the TIP comply with these targets. As you all know, we have a lot of work underway right now that will help us accelerate emissions reductions from the transportation section between the CCAP development and the C2C scenario planning. We agree that more tools are needed to reduce emissions from transportation, and we'll be providing more specific feedback to ensure the implementation levels included are appropriately aligned with our federal requirements as a MPO. The last component of this sort of omnibus package of bills is the Zero Emission Vehicles Act. The Zero Emission Vehicles Act provides several provisions accelerating zero emission vehicle adoption in Illinois, and will require that Illinois align with California's vehicle emission standards for passenger and heavy duty vehicles. So that's all kind of the update we wanted to provide. Included in your packet of materials is a list of bills and legislation that we've tracked this legislative session, some which have been passed into law, some which were re-referred to a Rules or Assignments Committee. We know that legislation has a tendency to resurface across different General Assemblies, so we'll continue to track and monitor legislation that affects our region. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. Were there any
Awesome.
questions on the legislative update?
Awesome. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much. For the next item, we're going to have Jared Patton, Senior Planner in the RPI Division, present work on the region's Climate Action Plan.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. As was just said, I'll be giving an update on the Regional Climate Action Plan. And I do want to highlight that this is going to be a brief update rather than a full discussion, not because we don't want your feedback, but because we're going to be using a significant amount of future meetings to have those detailed discussions. So hopefully we can bank some of that time and get some goodwill to take over the agenda in future meetings. If you go to the next slide, I will plan to start with a quick discussion of the CPRG program more broadly, because there have been some updates since we last presented to you. Of course, Bill stole my thunder a little bit and highlighted that the state has received $430 million for a pretty expansive project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, $430 million for work across many sectors. There aren't a ton of details available about their work yet. They were just awarded the funding, but it is something that you should all have on your radar because it's going to be significant for the state and for the region. The flip side of that is that none of the applicants in our region receive funding directly. And there are a few reasons why that might be the case. CMAP worked with applicants in the region to try to get a narrow list of priority recommendations together. Ultimately, 5 proposals were assembled and submitted. And when we look at projects that were awarded funding, we found that Colorado was the only place where both the state and the region received funds. So likely EPA was trying to awards to have some kind of even geographic distribution for how those funds were handled. 25 projects were awarded, half of those went to states. Of the regional projects that were accepted, we found that most of those were given to coalitions that were working on a few priority projects. So that's a good note for future rounds of funding. Now, the next slide gets into the CAP itself. We already presented the details of the project. If you can go to the next slide, please, Michael. The goal for this plan is a net zero by 2050 target. That's pretty ambitious. Even more ambitious is a 50% reduction by 2030. That's just 6 years away. And that is reflecting the federal goals to meet the Paris agreements. The project is being conducted in partnership with the Mayor's Caucus and the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission, or NERPC, our partners in Indiana, and our due date's July 25th. None of that has changed from the last meeting, but one thing that has changed is our jurisdiction for the project. So this map is not a one-for-one match with the Chicago MSA. Since we last spoke, we added LaPorte County in Indiana to our planning area. And that's because we're really trying to focus on implementation with our work. We want to make sure that we end not just with a high quality plan, but with a high quality plan that's ready to be used by the people who are doing the work. So NERPC, our Indiana MPO partners, have a 3-county jurisdiction that includes Lake, Porter, and LaPorte County. And ultimately, we didn't think it made sense to hand them a plan that only covered 2/3 of their jurisdiction. So we've made the decision to add them. That changes our GHG emissions a little bit. It adds some industrial emissions. It changes our population, but there are significant economies of scale here. So it's not going to increase our workload by that much, and it's going to make the document that much more usable. If you go to the next slide, this speaks a little bit more to the timeline. We have about a year from right now to complete this work. Fortunately, we've already started. We've been doing quite a bit of engagement, which I'll be updating you on since we last spoke. We've also begun doing our research, and we're working towards these decarbonization briefs, which are sector-specific deep dives into where we stand today and what some of the solutions might be moving forward. And we're also putting together our modeling work. We haven't started running the models yet, but we're working with our consultants, E3, to identify what the best tools are so that we can fact check our work and make sure that the recommendations we're putting in the plan are going to achieve the goals of the plan. And just to highlight one more time, July 2025, that's when we'll need to wrap things up. If you go to the next slide, please. This is where I'm going to switch to engagement a little bit. I mentioned we've already started this work. We've had our first meetings for our steering committee, our 3 sector-specific work groups, a water and wastewater focus group, and we've got an equity working group on the books. That'll be happening next month. You can see the diagram one more time on the slide here of how we're breaking up our engagement committee structure. We're relying on these 3 sector-specific working groups made of subject matter experts, as well as an equity working group that's going to focus on equity items in the plan. So that means reviewing recommendations with an equity lens, but also reviewing our general messaging, our strategy for low-income and disinvested communities outreach, and our drawing a blank. Benefits analysis, our co-benefits analysis. EPA is asking us to do an analysis of how the recommendations that we're proposing will both benefit low-income and disinvested communities and what the cost to those communities could be. In addition to those, we'll be having specific one-off workshops to address topics that are either more specific than a single working group can focus on, so something like freight or agriculture, or so broad that it touches on multiple sectors like energy. All of those groups feed into our steering committee. Now, if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about each of these groups and what we heard. So our steering committee is pretty big. It's pretty expansive. I won't read all of these organizations off to you, but you're welcome to do so yourself. We're really focusing our membership of this group on key implementers. So there are a lot of government organizations here. We also have some associations, we have nonprofits, we have some environmental justice organizations. We're focusing on the people that we need to have bought in to make the plan happen. In most cases, the committee members, the steering committee members, are decision makers rather than subject matter experts, though we do have direct ties with representatives from each working group to the steering committee so that those voices are included in the discussions. At our first meeting, I think the high-level takeaway was that there was broad agreement on the general goals of the plan and specifically on that net zero target, which is really important because that is an incredibly ambitious goal. And if we don't have buy-in at the beginning, then it's probably not going to happen. The next slide is going to get into the working groups a little bit. Our first working group met 2 weeks ago, and it was focused on transportation. This group, we focused on the people who are managing, building, and maintaining our transportation system. So a lot of government players, public transit agencies, but also some of the folks who are kind of leading thought in this area. So we have nonprofits, we have, again, environmental justice organizations, and we have some private businesses like Martin Power International. And the conversation here started with broad introduction to the project, to the sector itself. And then we started to get into the details a little bit. And I think one of the big takeaways from this conversation is that while there is broad agreement about the direction that we need to be moving in, there is some disagreement about the specifics about what we do to get there. And that's what we want to focus on in future meetings is what is the right ratio of recommendations, which policies are a really good idea, whereas which ones are going to be a distraction. And I think that's what we're really excited to get into is to flesh out how we mix these recommendations to come up with something that's relevant and actionable. The next slide gets into our second working group, which focused on industry and manufacturing. This group, we sought to have a mix of associations representing several businesses within an industry, as well as government entities and some community-based organizations. And this is an area where, frankly, we could use your help. I think we are very interested in growing the participation in this group and adding some more voices who can speak directly for businesses and business owners. So I'd ask you to take a look at who's here, and if anyone comes to mind who you think would be a good contributor to the discussion, let us know, help us reach out to those folks, because this is an area that is a large chunk of our emissions, and it's a hard one to address and one where we don't have as much expertise. So ask for your help with that. And then finally, our third working group just happened this past Tuesday, and it was focused on commercial and residential buildings. Here, similar to our other groups, we do have a lot of government. We also have some of these associations. We have some of the thought leaders and the nonprofit and research side. And we had a really great discussion about where things stand today and where we want to go in the future. And one of our big takeaways from this discussion is that there's already a lot of progress happening in the region. And the key challenge is not necessarily going to be figuring out new things, but instead figuring out how to scale up what's already happening. So that means investing in, or rather developing financing ideas, scaling up technology, addressing workforce shortages, and just figuring out how we can take what we know works today and give it a chance of being successful at a much bigger scale. So if you go to the next slide, please. One of the big topics we discussed at our steering committee and all of our working groups was what our plan guiding principles are going to be. Before we get into deciding which recommendations we are going to use, we want to make sure that we have a clear framework for evaluating those recommendations. And where things stand now, we have these 3 guiding principles: commit to zero, center equity, and plan for action. And as a demonstration of just how draft and how fresh these are, I'm going to use my notes to read them off to you because the definition has changed several times this week. So the first one, commit to zero, we mean embracing transformative strategies that accelerate the region's progress towards net zero emissions and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Makes sense. That aligns with our overall goal. The second guiding principle is to center equity, seek to reduce existing disparities for underserved and marginalized communities, and design strategies to maximize co-benefits to advance an inclusive transition. And then finally, planning for action means prioritizing actions that move the region towards short and long-term goals, and to collaborate with stakeholders to ensure the plan recommendations are relevant, realistic, and actionable. Next slide, please. So that's the high-level summary of where things stand today, but I want to leave you with an idea of what we'll be talking about the next time we come before you in October. So we'll give you another update on where things stand with the CAP development process, but we'll really do a deep dive into emissions, focusing on some of the key sectors that aren't well represented in our existing working group structure. So those are water, wastewater, agriculture, and carbon sinks, which really speaks to natural lands. We'll also give you an update on the other sectors, but those are the areas where we're really going to be relying on your expertise. And we're going to start having a conversation about identifying strategies for reducing emissions, prioritizing those strategies, and figuring out how we can make sure that they're implementable. So how can we represent those measures in a way that will be accessible to the people who will be making them happen? Now, the final note here is that a lot of work is going to happen before October. We know you have a lot of expertise. We want to draw on that expertise. So we're not going to wait until October to contact you again. Before the next meeting, we may be sending out surveys. We might be asking you to review documents or help us with some of the decisions that we're trying to make. So if and when that happens, I ask that you please just take a few minutes, let us know what you're thinking and help us out, because ultimately the point of this this group is not just to have discussions in meetings, it's to help CMAP move our policy forward. So, and I believe that's everything that I have. I'm open to any questions or comments.
Thanks very much, Jared. Does anyone have questions related to the work, the significant work that's underway related to the Regional Climate Action Plan? I guess I have one quick question. You mentioned looking for additional participation on the industry working group, and are there others? I mean, I think that's, a role that we can play is look for other expertise within our networks. Is there, are there other areas specifically that you think you're going to need our eyes out there looking for folks?
Do you mean in addition to the industry working group or specific to that
I
group?
wanted to highlight the industry one,
Yeah.
just put a fine point on it, but if there are others.
Yeah, so I think we are most lacking currently in participation by the private sector and by some of the key industries that we're going to need to decarbonize. I think, steel is such a huge part at the MSA level that we want to make sure they're included. And to some extent, they are already included, but we don't want to focus all of our recommendations on steel because that's just a few really important players. So I think we're looking for people who have large networks within the more general Illinois manufacturing community. We could use some help in that area, but I'm also open to what others on the team, if Nora has thoughts or others.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also have a lot to learn in the energy sector space. And so I think we're in the preliminary stages. Luckily, our consultants, E3, are very knowledgeable in this area and they'll help us navigate. But that could be another area where we're going to need to identify. It's just we are needing to learn a lot about the regulatory environment. We are crossing into 3 states, and we need to come up with an array of different tools and strategies there. So that's another flag.
All right. Well, the other thought that I had just related to sort of reaching out into specific sectors is how you use those associations that are represented. So whether it's Illinois Green Alliance to get out to the buildings design sector, or one of those industrial alliances to get out to the individual members, or transportation, we have, actual vehicle manufacturers or heavy equipment manufacturers, maybe not specifically in our region, but they're creating the products that are, so Navistar and John Deere and I don't know, Stellantis not too far away, transitioning to an EV plant, and Rivian, of course. So how you might want to loop folks like that in, they may have some insight. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, we're going to move along. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Samira.
Just wanted to ask what the best way is to connect if we do have ideas or folks that may be interested. Who's the best contact?
Yeah, if you have Nora's email, you can send her an email, or you can reach out to me. I can provide my email after the meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, the next agenda item is on the Regional Transportation Plan. Looks like Julie Reschke, Policy Analyst, will provide an update on the project.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Julie Reschke. I'm a policy analyst at CMAP. I use she, her pronouns. We'll be summarizing some existing transportation goals today as we head into an early discussion about the potential vision for the Regional Transportation Plan. So as you may know, this is a time of very significant regional planning for CMAP. In the coming years, CMAP will collaborate with the region to prepare a vision plan that provides high-level guidance about what the region would like to achieve. The vision will guide planning activities over the next 8 to 10 years, with future action plans and strategies tailored to issues in transportation, climate, and the regional economy. Doing this will allow us to be more responsive to funding opportunities and rethink how we work with coalitions on strategic initiatives. We're just getting started with the multi-year process to develop the regional vision, and we're excited to talk about it more in a future meeting. While this vision plan is being prepared, however, CMAP has a couple time-sensitive plans that are already underway that are tied to federal requirements. One plan that was just discussed is the Climate Action Plan, and the other plan that's underway is the Regional Transportation Plan, which we'll have the opportunity to discuss more today. Ultimately, all of these plans, the Regional Transportation Plan, the Climate Action Plan, and other future plans will interact and correspond with each other in a way that aligns with the priorities set in the regional vision. But for today, we'll start with an early discussion about the RTP specifically. So as the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for this region, CMAP must prepare a long-range transportation plan every 4 years. In the past, the transportation plan was included in the comprehensive plans of GO to 2040 and on to 2050. And specifically within on to 2050, the transportation plan was featured in the mobility chapter, financial plan, regionally significant projects, and other relevant appendices. This upcoming RTP that we're working on will maintain that same 2050 horizon year and must be completed by October 2026 per federal requirements. The purpose of the RTP is to be a forward-thinking plan that guides transportation investments, policies, and initiatives within Northeastern Illinois. And building on the foundation set in on to 2050, the RTP will outline a transportation vision that aligns with broader regional goals and reflects the diverse needs and aspirations of communities in the region. So the RTP development process is guided by 3 overarching questions. What is the future transportation system we want? What are the challenges and opportunities to get there? And how will we achieve the system we want? Next slide. Each of these overarching questions are informed by different work streams within the RTP. For the first question, goals and objectives and the measures and targets associated with them will help identify the region's vision for transportation. Next, analyses of existing conditions and travel demand will articulate what's currently happening in the region, while the socioeconomic forecast and analysis of future needs will provide insight into what we can expect in the future. Lastly, as goals, opportunities, and challenges are identified, the region can begin establishing how it will achieve its vision for transportation by analyzing and prioritizing capital projects, preparing a long-term financial plan, and setting strategies and implementation measures. It's important to note that some of the phases of work on the screen will happen continuously throughout the RTP development process. For example, the goal setting phase that we're currently in will be fluid to account for new information we gain along the way through efforts like the socioeconomic forecast and upcoming analysis of existing conditions. This overview is just intended to provide a high-level summary of how the many work streams under the RTP will come together in the final plan. Next slide, please. So just wanted to touch on some of the state and federal requirements for the RTP. First, the RTP must align with federal goals to improve safety, maintain a state of good repair, reduce congestion and improve reliability, improve freight movement, promote environmental sustainability, and complete projects on schedule. And per state law, the RTP must also reflect the relationship between transportation and land use, economic development, air quality, and energy consumption. And additionally, the RTP must consider the goals, metrics, and other details included by plans by local governments and transit agencies. This is a task that staff have recently completed, which I think leads us into the next slide pretty well. So CMAP staff recently reviewed and summarized nearly 30 long-range plans adopted by the federal government, state of Illinois, CMAP itself, county governments in the region, transit agencies, and other stakeholders. Included in your agenda packet is a memo detailing the process to review these plans and summarize the common goals, objectives, and strategies. On the screen are the overarching goals that were identified through this plan review. Some examples include increasing mobility and accessibility, which is a goal area that speaks to objectives to manage congestion, support transit access, and expand the bike and pedestrian network. Of course, there's also the goal to acknowledge the role that transportation plays in mitigating climate change, enhancing resilience, and protecting the environment. Reviewing the plans adopted in the region revealed common themes across shared priorities. While not every plan that we reviewed includes each of the goals listed on the screen, the summary intends to broadly represent the overarching goals that guide transportation plans in Northeastern Illinois. The RTP is intended to be a plan for the region where every community can see their interests and needs represented. Conducting this plan review was a crucial first step to begin understanding the transportation priorities set in the region, and we'll continue to further inform this understanding through robust engagement and outreach throughout the plan's development. For more information about this plan review, please see the memo included in your agenda packet. Next slide, please. So as stated previously, the RTP will build on the transportation vision set by ONDA 2050. The ONDA 2050 Comprehensive Plan was originally adopted in 2018 and updated recently in 2022. In the plan, the region achieved consensus on many transportation priorities, which are reflected in all 5 of the plan chapters. For today, we'll primarily focus on the mobility chapter, which sets a vision of a modern multimodal system that adapts to changing travel demand, a system that works better for everyone, and a region that makes transformative investments. By reviewing the foundation set in ONDA 2050, we have the opportunity to consider how the RTP could build off these goals. Next slide, please. The mobility chapter in ONDA 2050 set a broad range of transportation goals. The overarching goals are on the screen. They include fully funding the region's transportation system, enhancing the approach to transportation programming, harnessing technology to improve travel and anticipate future impacts, and improving travel safety. They also continue on to the next slide, where there are goals to make transit more competitive, maintain the region's status as a freight hub by promoting network efficiency and mitigating risks to adjacent communities. There's also leveraging the transportation network to promote inclusive growth or more equitable outcomes in local communities. And then last but not least, there's the goal to improve the resilience of the transportation network to weather and climate change. While ONDA 2050 goes into greater detail about actions that could implement each of the overarching goals, the high-level summary represents topics where the region recently achieved consensus on transportation priorities. As we begin a conversation about RTP goals today, ONDA 2050 serves as a starting point to consider what the region's vision for transportation is today. So as stated previously, the RTP will not be a plan just for CMAP. It's a plan for the whole region. It's important that all communities in the region ultimately see themselves reflected in the RTP vision. And based on the current transportation plans that we reviewed and where we recently achieved consensus in ONDA 2050, the region appears to envision a transportation that's fully funded, regionally coordinated, connected across modes, safe, efficient, and reliable, resilient to climate change, accessible, inclusive, and equitable, supportive of economies, and responsive to change and emerging technologies. As we begin considering goals for the RTP, we'll discuss how you would like the RTP to build off this foundation. Since ONDA 2050 was originally adopted in 2018, the region has made significant progress implementing its goals. All implementers have made essential contributions to advance key transportation priorities, some of which are on the screen. Some examples of this progress include the Rebuild Illinois funding package, which provided crucial support for transportation projects in the region. We also have the RTA's Transit is the Answer, which identified solutions to the transit fiscal cliff and spoke about ways to align transit with other key goals like climate resilience and equity. The Plan of Action for Regional Transit, also known as PART, identifies some recommendations that help the region invest in a stronger and more financially secure transit system. CMAP's Community Alliance for Regional Equity, also known as CARE, has sought to make our investment processes more equitable and strengthen community collaboration. The CREATE program has secured funding and implemented projects that are crucial to the efficiency of the regional freight network. The RTA and CMAP have partnered on calls for projects with municipalities to provide resources and technical assistance. And last but not least, the Safe Travel for All roadmap, also known as STAR, represents partnerships with county governments to develop safety action plans, advance safe street standards, and implement speed management best practices. While all of these efforts have been important for advancing the region's transportation priorities, they're just a handful of the immense amount of work that's been underway. As we head into discussion, it may be helpful to reflect on transportation progress made in your community and consider if there's momentum you think we should continue or gaps that we should address. Next slide, please. Before we get into discussion, I'd like to preview some next steps. Throughout the summer and fall, the RTP team will continue meeting with transportation stakeholders to have more detailed conversations about what they would like to see in the RTP vision. Later this year, we'll also open a public survey to further inform the vision and goals of the RTP. And in the near future, we'll open an online portal where agencies, organizations, or individuals can submit materials they would like CMAP to consider for the RTP. Could be things like research papers, past plans, position papers, or other material that would be relevant. And lastly, CMAP has created a site where we'll post information and resources about the RTP. The link for that is on the screen in case you want to share it with others or check back for updates. Okay. Next slide, please. Oop, one more before we get into discussion. To briefly look ahead before we start chatting about what you would like to see out of the RTP. The vision for the regional transportation system will interact with the context of what's happening in the region. To understand and anticipate trends that the region will be experiencing, staff at CMAP are preparing a socioeconomic forecast. The early preliminary draft of the regional forecast was recently completed and forecasts slow growth for the region throughout 2050. The forecast is lower than what was included in the ONDA 2050 update in 2022 and reflects national trends towards lower growth. Many of our peer MPOs are witnessing a similar trend. The graph on this slide compares the new preliminary regional forecast with that of the former forecast from 2022. One of the reasons projected growth is lower than in the past is that the fertility rate has remained low since the 2008 recession. And also the jobs forecast that CMAP purchases from Moody Analytics is showing slower growth than in previous cycles. The forecast team is working with a local advisory group made up of representatives nominated by councils of government, as well as a technical advisory group of experts in forecasting to review the results and get a sense of the implications. The local forecast, which distributes the forecasted population totals to specific areas in the region, is still in development. While we're beginning the conversation about RTP goals today, the goal setting phase is intended to be fluid to account for new information gained along the way, similar to the socioeconomic forecast. Moving forward, we'll continue to provide updates about the socioeconomic forecast, and the RTP project team will also provide additional resources like analyses of existing conditions and future needs to further inform our understanding and goal setting. Okay. So reflecting on some of the goals that were summarized, we would love to hear your thoughts. The goals that we presented on, are they still relevant to today's needs and priorities? Is there anything that's needed to make progress or move forward? Or are there emerging or evolving issues that you would like to see addressed?
Hi. That last slide really piqued my interest when you pointed out the declining fertility rates. Are you looking to see or investigate why? Because IVF has recently, their rates have been linked to air pollution. There's increased plastic and reproductive organs. So I'm looking at it from a health lens of the causes instead of, why is that happening? I'm not saying it's all. Actually, climate just ends up being all health related anyway. But I was just curious what you're looking to do with that chart. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't speak to that myself, but I can certainly bring it back to the socioeconomic forecast team as something to look into. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. So I'm combining the last two presentations with my question. I noticed that transportation wasn't called out on the slide as one of the sectors, and I was wondering if that was intentional choice or how the relationship between the climate action plan and the regional transportation plan, if there is any.
Oh, so transportation is definitely a major focus area of the climate action plan. We have a robust team working on exploring the transportation emissions, the profile, the drivers, and the potential reduction strategies. We've also engaged our transportation working group to help us along the way and provide feedback. So yeah, it's definitely a key part of the strategy it's almost a quarter, slightly more than a quarter of our total emissions. And so if we're going to hit our net zero, we have to tackle those. Am I understanding your question correctly? Mary? Okay.
There was a section of the slide that said like wastewater and some other sectors, and transportation wasn't listed there.
Oh,
so.
yeah. So as Jared explained with our engagement structure, we have, we're really using working groups to cover these large scale emissions. And so we've started to call them the big three, right? Buildings, transportation, and industry. And so we're going to have dedicated conversations with those working groups on those topics. We're going to keep the climate committee abreast with what we're hearing and learning and share all of that stuff with you. And then we're also hoping to rely on the expertise of this group to help us with all the other sectors that make up a smaller portion of our total, but are important to get to those goals as well.
But I'll just add in, you're not excluded from those working groups, transportation or industry or, yeah. Edith?
Yeah, and just a general question. First of all, really impressive work on looking at all those existing plans and synthesizing them to find the common goals. And what occurs to me is how much uncertainty there is going forward. Just in the last years with the change in transportation patterns, the change in work styles and commuting and all. How do you anticipate what's the next, into the future? I know this is what you do as a planning agency, but it kind of bends my brain to think about how you can accommodate. I mean, I'm thinking climate change and what happens in terms of, weather extremes and how that will continue to impact transportation patterns. If we have another pandemic, and what happens to the economy? And how do you factor in so much uncertainty as you're projecting forward? It's an enormous challenge. So kudos. Just for tackling that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you highlight a great challenge of long-range planning in general. I think we will aim to answer that question through two major work streams. One is analysis of existing conditions, so getting a sense of what's happening on the ground currently, and then also the socioeconomic forecast to supplement our understanding there. But we also have a travel demand model that's developed as a part of the RTP that will consider these changes in travel patterns and try to forecast out what that looks like in the future. I might look to see if others have other information to add there, but that's kind of the main ways that we plan to answer that question.
Let alone the impacts to changing bylaws that might have on those models. Just kidding. Robin.
I was curious if some of those socioeconomic projections included like land use projections. So obviously CMAP has the inventories for land use, but are there any ideas for projecting those into the future?
That is a great question. I'm not on the socioeconomic forecast team myself. I do believe that land use is somewhat considered, but this is something we can get back to you on. Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to you on that question. Thanks.
Ryan.
So we've got a number of kind of inbound requests recently asking about population projections around climate migration, in-migration within the US, out-migration from Chicago, in-migration from global locations. And I guess I'm interested, it sounds like you're maybe purchasing some of the analytics for population growth, but what factors are kind of considered for kind of climate migration, or there's different phrases, climate mobility, but like what's baked into that projection of maybe potentially a loss of 1 million people over the last projection?
Sure. I think we'll have to have the socioeconomic team follow up with the members here with some additional information, but I do know that the information that we purchased from Moody's Analytics, which is sort of like an industry best standard kind of resource, has taken the effects of climate into consideration for the forecast that we're using with them. So it is a factor that's influencing some of the data that we're working with, but we can circle back with some more details.
Paul.
Edith's comment about sort of what the future holds. As you look at traffic patterns and the migration of people, as Ryan mentioned, through maybe perhaps out from the city towards the suburbs, is there any way to track the prevalence of the like the Amazon distribution centers and the traffic that's generated from those, which is a new phenomenon, say over the last 5 to 10 years? and to forecast what load that has on the traffic system? Is that something that there's any data that can lend any, that can inform that type of question? And to follow up on that, if there's any moving towards non-combustion vehicles, to the question previously about some of the industry groups, I think it might have been more focused on buildings, but that would be a good one to reach out to is the distribution centers, and they have sort of a pretty significant load based on all these trucks constantly driving around and delivering something, you know, that costs $5.
That's very helpful insight. For the first question, I do believe that's something that we would be able to understand further in the model. That's not work that we have really kicked off fully yet, but it's a good flag for us to keep in mind as we do that work.
Well, I did want to make sure you are aware of another project that we have in the climate space. So I think it was last fall, we successfully received a grant from the Department of Energy through the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to get technical assistance from Argonne and Oak Ridge National Laboratories on our transportation greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And we're particularly excited to work with this group because Argonne runs a Polaris travel demand model that has a more robust freight component to it. And so we're going to use this opportunity to understand the freight patterns better. And while we're not directly connected to, you know, we're going to understand those better, and hopefully that can help inform the RTP to the extent possible. But the question that we're really asking is, how do we get to a net zero transportation emission future through this modeling exercise? And then what happens to the grid as we electrify vehicles? And what does that mean for the grid as it responds to these conditions? So it's another project that is sort of side by side with our climate action plan that's going to do a deeper dive from a modeling perspective, do scenario planning, and hopefully it's a longer term project. It's a research project, right? Yeah, doesn't it? So we'll be doing that over the next 3 years, and hopefully we can use it to inform our climate action planning process as well as RTP.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation and the great conversation following. For the next item, we are going to talk about the Environmental Justice Framework Project. And so Michael Collins, an analyst in the RPI division, is going to present that work. Take it away, Michael. And thanks for all your help in organizing today's meeting. Thank you.
Of course. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Collins. I'm a policy analyst in the RPI division, and I'll be talking to you today about a relatively new project here at CMAP called the Environmental Justice Framework. This is part of a broader 5-year effort to establish our first equity program area, which is really our attempt to figure out how to put together all the various pieces of work that we're already doing to meet our environmental justice obligations, but clarify what exactly we're doing, find a way to communicate it with our stakeholders more clearly, and of course, learn what are some of the new and best practices. Next slide, please. So we've got a team of folks representing 3 different divisions over here at CMAP. So we have folks with skills in statistics and analysis, in policy and planning, all working together. Next slide. And we're figuring out how to really get a framework around all of the work that we're doing, common language, a common sense of terms. When I think of environmental justice colloquially, you know, it might look very different than in terms of federal legislation and our MPO requirements. And so we're trying to meld those 2 worlds to figure out the common sense and the legal sense. And next slide, please. And so this project is a 1-year effort. And really, it's just the very beginning. So this is just to identify future projects, identify gaps in what we could be doing and aren't doing. And so, of course, we started with a legal review. We're talking with staff across a variety of departments with different expertise and skills. And the part that I'm teasing today is that we're getting to talk to some of our external stakeholders and get a sense of what some of the best practices are outside of CMAP and our MPO peers. And the part that I'm really excited about going forward is that our team, based on the feedback that we gather from folks, We'll pick one of our recommendations and actually execute it within this calendar year. So we're probably going to do something small like a lunch and learn or a workshop activity, but the goal is to get in the practice of routinely demonstrating environmental justice efforts and figuring out ways to distribute this work more broadly. So it's not just one or two people who have to do this, but really we're thinking about it all the time in the same way that we think about climate in all of our projects, or we think about accessibility and how to communicate more clearly to really make sure that environmental justice is at the same level of practice. And then, of course, what we learn, we want to take on the road and share with other folks. Next slide, please. And so at this point in the process, we're looking to summarize what are we required to do, look at some of the case studies of how we're already doing that work. So things like our local technical assistance program, for example, is one of the places where I think we make real our environmental justice commitments. And so really painting the picture of how we do that and giving good, clear examples, both to internal CMAP staff, say new staff who are trying to figure out, I know I'm supposed to do something about environmental justice. What exactly does that mean? And then lastly, we'll make some recommendations for next steps so we can really take our work to the next level. Next slide, please. And so environmental justice is big. It could mean a lot of different things. And so just for the purposes of analysis, we've broken this down into 5 buckets, chunks, areas. And so the first one is really inward looking, thinking about our internal databases, training, what happens if you're a new staff member and you're looking to onboard and learn what environmental justice is, and really helping folks develop those skills. Of course, there's the legal component and trying to understand how all of this gets turned into actual policy that we're implementing. A surprisingly complicated part of this is trying to calculate how do you convert something like justice into a visualization, into something that you can track decisively over time. And so there's a lot of different attempts to try and do this process. We've already heard the difficulties in trying to look into the future 20 or 30 years. And so we're wrangling with just exactly how much data there is. And so we have a lot of recommendations around how to organize this information more clearly for staff. And of course, all of this thought and reflection and data analysis is really aimed towards changing what gets built and what we fund. And so thinking of ways that we can both show how we're already executing our environmental justice obligations, and also maybe some other ways that we could better integrate this analysis, this visualization, this tracking, and incorporate it into our programming. And then a big part of most environmental justice regulations and laws is trying to figure out how exactly you get the feedback from the community and incorporate that into your programming decisions. And so we have a pretty big chunk of the forthcoming memo will be about how to really do the best practices for community engagement. And next slide, please. And so we've been going to folks both internal to CMAP and some of our MPOs and soon some of our external friends, and really just asking some very basic questions. These are open-ended questions. We're in a, consume as much information stage. So we're really just trying to get a broad spread. And so if you feel like you could speak to any of these things, you should, raise your hand. I'll follow up with you. And we can start thinking about how to incorporate some of your recommendations. Next slide. And so just to give you a quick sense of some of the folks we're talking to inside of CMAP. And so you can really see we're trying to talk to everyone across divisions, including, of course, finance and human resources, which I don't think gets the shine that they always deserve. But of course, it's critical to our work. We have some internal tools like an intranet where a lot of information lives. And so we've been thinking about how do we make sure that our environmental justice tools and our thoughts live in a place where folks can routinely use them. Next slide, please. And so some of we're still in the drafting of this memo. And so these are just very high level takeaways so far, but some of the things that we've noticed is that This effort is really our first best attempt to centralize all of the resources, rules, obligations that CMAP has. It's quite expansive. And so instead of having this be in disparate places or projects, we're really trying to think about this holistically. In terms of policy, we will make some recommendations about, some common sense things like putting things on the website and organizing them in a way that might clarify what exactly we're up to. And then we have some very ambitious goals. We wouldn't be a CMAP team if we didn't have ambitious goals for how we think about data. And so there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of just really putting everything that we have in one place. But I think there's some more ambitious goals that we're looking at in terms of thinking about the tools, how you integrate them into different projects and get that feedback loop where the programming investments match onto the greenhouse gas emissions, map onto our policy, and getting that full, easily diagrammed, putting that all in one place where you can really see how everything is linked. And so I think data visualization will be very important for something as abstract as environmental justice. Next slide, please. In terms of programming investments, I think, again, CMAP is doing some very interesting work, but the difficulty is translating this into common sense, easily accessible tools and resources for the community. And so we've seen some examples from some peer MPOs where they create something called the Citizen Guide, which is a plain language effort to explain things like the Transportation Improvement Program. Typically, those guides might be in 50 to 100 pages, often feature a lot of tables. That's not necessarily something that someone on the move who's just trying to get a quick understanding of what's changed in the past couple of years would be able to quickly move through. So we're really trying to think about how to explain what we're doing more clearly, and we'll make some recommendations around that. And I think lastly, in terms of community engagement, we're doing a lot. I also run the Community Alliance for Regional Equity, which is another effort to meet with EJ communities. And so one of the things that we've been piloting in that program is just working with staff, answering their questions about how to be better communicators, how to work with folks from different communities. And we're hoping to institutionalize some of those lessons. Next slide, please. So that's a little bit about what we've discovered so far and what we're thinking about. And what I'm hoping today is to get a couple more ideas of either types of folks we should be talking to, general, types of organizations, or if there's people in particular who you're excited about and would like to make a warm handoff, please let us know. We would love to meet with folks, and we'll probably spend the next couple of months doing some more interviews before we draft up our recommendations and hopefully start our workshop. That's everything from me.
Thanks very much. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Thanks, Michael. Are you connected with folks over at the city that are doing the cumulative impacts assessment and that work?
So they are, of course, in our literature review, but we don't have an active relationship with any of those folks.
We should, I can help connect you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Edith. Did you?
Sure. I don't want to miss an opportunity to just call out, when we're talking about environmental justice, how important it is to consider the smaller local governments across the region. And with CMAP did the low income and disadvantaged analysis for us, which I'm sure you know about. But we found that we have 49% of the population for environmental justice census tracts in the suburban region. And the current thinking around environmental justice leadership is very focused on community-based organizations. We see that in much of what the EPA is rolling out, a lot of what philanthropy is rolling out at the state level. CEJA is very focused on community-based organizations and suburban communities that are environmental justice. And I wish Thomas Maylard was here from Waukegan, because I work with him a lot as an environmental justice community for the local government. So the CBO, the community-based organization in a small community, may be the local government itself. So just reframe the thinking, and I will find you and we can talk in more detail about that. But I just want to say that for the record, that we feel very strongly about having that inclusion, being creative in how you engage when you get out to regions that do not have the capacity for not-for-profit leadership and community-based organizations, where philanthropy hasn't invested in the suburban region to help support or bolster some of those community-based organizations in the suburban region. Thanks.
So just one quick comment, and I think actually, I just came out of another meeting where we were discussing the difference between environmental justice and climate justice. And I do think just within the work around environmental justice, one thing that we lose track of because we're so focused on the region and the local impact is the broader global sort of climate justice questions. And if that, I think sometimes we get focused by our local geography and miss some of the opportunities to discuss global impact or harm around a climate justice lens. So because I think that then intersects with the climate planning, it may not have a local environmental justice benefit, some of these projects, but it has a global climate environmental benefit. So just to maybe make that comment, because I think it's something that we can miss the forest for the trees some days.
Thank you.
Just one quick question. I found the use of the word obligations interesting, like as opposed to something like principles or values. So just could you speak to a little bit more like the choice behind that terminology and how that might play out in practice?
Sure. So the MPO process has very strict legal definitions about environmental justice, how you quantify it. For example, you have to identify low income, minority populations, limited English proficiency populations, and some type of test of income. I think that we could be more expansive than that. And that this is an opportunity to look beyond the 3 or 4 protected categories that are specifically named and look to an expanded list. Other MPOs have 22 protected categories that they would look to in terms of environmental justice communities. And so I think there's, your bare minimum standards, and then there's going above and beyond. And I think we're already doing a fairly good job of going above and beyond, but we have to make sure we meet those, that we publish them in ways that satisfy the needs of our federal partners, and then hopefully also translate them into ways that are a little bit more exciting for folks in CBO positions who probably aren't familiar with some of the tests and standards that would be applied for, say, the expansion of a roadway project.
This is obviously a very expansive issue that can go many different directions. I just want to flag the overlap in looking at some of the federal to state funding opportunities and implementation that's happening at the local level. Just to name an example, Blacks and Green is a local to Chicago environmental justice organization. Not sure if you're already engaged with them, but they are hosting millions of dollars worth of money and an EJ Tic-Tac. So there are opportunities like that that would probably make sense to explore. I see you nodding, so I won't belabor that.
No, that's a great suggestion. And yes, I'm down. I would love to learn more about geothermal energy in Washington Park. It's very exciting.
Okay, well, we're getting near the end, so we will move on. Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate that presentation and discussion. Item 6 is member updates. I don't think there were any updates that were provided in advance, so I'll give the members of the committee a chance to provide any updates they'd like to share. Oh, bye, Ryan. Thank you. Not an update, but Ryan is leaving. Any other member updates? If not, other business? Is there any other business to come before the committee?
No other business.
All right, well, we will move to item 7, which is public comment. So comments.
Yes.
Are there? Oh,
So-
excellent. I'll let Nora
So
read.
we had a couple of comments that came in over the Zoom that I should read into the record. So when we were talking about the climate action plan update, Danielle Gallet made a suggestion for a private company that could be included in our process, and that was Method. It's a soap company based in Pullman. John Paul Jones also commented that the transportation working group should be broader and include along with the building group, and so we'll follow up with John to get more of his ideas there. And then during the overview of the regional transportation plan, John Paul Jones added that relative to job growth, how do we factor in land use like US Steel, Chicago 78, Pullman, Near West, West Loop, So it's really talking about larger development proposals that are in the works, and so we'll follow up with him on those details. And that is it on the comments on the Zoom, and I don't believe we received any written comments formally for this meeting.
This is John Paul Jones. We did submit a statement through email. We did it with Grover and Inglewood, also with the statement of Inglewood initiatives, and we did submit a public statement as well.
Okay, apologies, John, I did not see that, but we will look for that and amend. We'll figure out how to make that clear.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll make sure that makes it into the meeting notes. And I believe with that, we can wrap up and close out this meeting. Our next meeting will be, this is virtual on October 24th. My notes say in person. It'll be a virtual workshop meeting on the 24th. And yeah, in compliance with Open Meetings Act. So look forward to seeing you there, learning more about many of these projects, I'm sure. And if there's no other business, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.